In October last year, I became quality manager at a company called Dolphin Computer Access. We deliver software, computer software, which delivers independence to computer users with vision impairments and learning disabilities. What we provide is things like screen readers, magnifiers. It's a very interesting application area for me because it's one that I've not directly worked with before. But in my role there as a quality manager, what I have to consider is whether improving the testing is the best thing to do, or whether there's actually other areas that need to be improved first, or even in preference. So let's look at the agenda, what we're going to talk about today. And there's three main points that I want to think about. What I want to think about is quality in terms of service to a customer. So it could be that improving testing directly affects the service we give to our customer, or it might be that there are other areas that are preferable to improve. The second thing I want to think about, and this is where the working ourselves out of a job comes in, is that if we actually enable other people to improve, that might decrease our involvement in the project, which might in the short term seem like it is not a benefit for us personally. But in the long term, if it provides improvement, then it could be of benefit to our organisations. And the third thing I want to think about is what I'm calling the big picture. I want to think about whether, as testers, we should focus on the details, or whether we should focus on a wider picture of what it is that our customers want to achieve. Now, it's very interesting that we have a mixture of people who regard themselves as primarily testers or test managers, and people who are taking other roles, perhaps other roles around projects. So we may have some project managers listening, we may have some developers, some development managers, some architects, all sorts of different people who will have different viewpoints about what we mean by quality and what we mean by improving quality. So as you're listening, think not just about your own viewpoint, but also about the other people in your projects and what they may be considering. Let's move then to the first slide, which has content. And if you've seen me speak before in the last year, you'll have seen me use this slide because I'm very engaged with this idea at the moment. Capers-Jones has spent many decades in the software industry gathering metrics and analysing them to look at the way that we carry out certain activities, what seems to work and what doesn't seem to work. And at the beginning of last year, he published a book, Software Engineering Best Practice. Now, I know that there are going to be people listening who don't like the phrase best practice, but bear with me, that's what he called the book. And in that book, he gathered tables and tables of metrics showing the effect of different activities around a project, an IT project, which ones improved the quality of software and which ones didn't. And right at the beginning of that book, in the preface, he made a very bold and unsettling statement. He said, "Poor software engineering, which gave rise to seriously flawed economic models, helped cause the recession. As the recession deepens, it is urgent that those concerned with software engineering take a hard look at fundamental issues: quality, security, measurement of results, and development best practices." Now, I thought that was really fascinating, that actually what he's saying there is that we can't simply look at what happened in the financial industry and what those people were doing. We have to look at what we as an industry did in providing software models. Absolutely fascinating. And in particular, what struck me is that once we get to a point of recession, there's going to be cutbacks. And what's going to happen if there's cutbacks? It's going to adversely affect the activities on projects which are not seen to be cost effective. I think that's a really important thing to think about. One of the things that I've seen over the decades that I've been in the industry is software testing teams whose activities and worth are not evident to their managers. So who is going to get cut back in a recession? It's going to be the people whose worth is not evident. Now, if we take that further on the next slide, what I'm saying here is that it's very easy to blame the end architects, the project managers, the developers. Oh, you know, they didn't do their work well, they're supposed to build quality in, we just measure it, and so on and so forth. So within the whole broad title of poor software engineering, there probably is some poor development work, some poor maintenance work, some flawed architecture, some less than excellent project management going on. But we need to look at ourselves and what we're doing. And the thing here is, if we're not doing good testing, then we won't be identifying that the models are flawed. And if we're not providing good information and good measurements, we won't put across our message, however good our testing is. So it's really important that what we consider is that the information we have to provide to everybody else enables them to make decisions. Now, I think it's true to say that all models are flawed because they're never a complete picture of reality. But here, if we have flawed models helping us make decisions, whether they're economic, social, or whatever other decisions your organisation has to make, if we have poor models, what we need to know as testers, the information we need to provide, is just how trustworthy are those models. Are they a good map of where we want to go, or are they a sketch map? It's not that we can necessarily help provide perfection, but what we need to provide is an understanding to the customers about where the flaws are so that they can avoid them. I think that's a really important thing. Now, having said all of that, I don't think that we need necessarily to be fretful. On the next slide, I'm quoting Jane Austen. "Let other pens dwell on guilt and misery," she said at the end of Mansfield Park, and it's absolutely right. What we need to reflect on is not how badly things might have been done in the past, but how well we could do them in the future. And if we do good testing and good measurement and information is supplied as a result of that and we're listened to, that should actually improve the development and maintenance. In other words, what we should do is look for the root causes of the defects and failures we identify and find ways to prevent those defects and failures happening again. At EuroSTAR last year, Jeff Thompson gave a very good talk, and during that talk he mentioned a colleague of his who had come into a project with a lot of knowledge of that type of project and what things typically went wrong in that application area. And they suddenly realized that the most beneficial thing they could do as testers was provide the development manager with that list of typical problems, typical failures and faults and defects. And the development manager could then preempt those being built into the software during actually code reviews, during actually the design process, making sure the requirements were more robust. In other words, doing the testing before the code's being built. We've been talking about that for years in the industry, haven't we? And there's a good reason for that. It's because it really does work. Actually seeing the testing as being something that prevents defects rather than it being something that's just there finding defects afterwards. Now, if we have good software engineering, we have good models, we should see an upturn, and that should mean investment. We actually are in a virtuous circle. So that's what I'm thinking with a positive hat on. Now, let's move on and see what we mean by the word test, the word tester. Because you see, it's not completely clear. What is a tester, for example? Well, if you look in the dictionary, a tester is actually a type of four-poster bed. And I'm not sure if that's what we would all see our role as being, possibly, lying down, putting up with other people bouncing around on us and having their way. A tester could be a person, but actually we could say it's a mindset. And what that means is anybody with that mindset can do testing if they hold that independent critical mindset. So it could be a project manager or a developer or a customer. It doesn't have to be somebody who's a specialist tester. It's the same with the word test. It could mean a person or a team or a department or an activity, or it could describe something, is the test environment ready, or it could be an object, a test itself, the test case, for example. What about testing? Is that a team of people? Have testing finished all their work? Is it an activity? Has all the testing completed? Is it actually a description? We have a very testing circumstance. It's very difficult to get through. The words quality, quality assurance, quality control, quality management, they have the same ambiguities. Quality means different things to different people. For some people, it's a group of people who are carrying out tasks. So somebody will say something like, oh, the quality team are going to do the quality stuff. They're going to make sure there's quality in the product. And we know that we want to question that because quality needs to be built in. What you can do as a test team or as a quality team is you can measure the level of quality. But unless you also are involved in building, you perhaps can't help with the building the quality in. QA, QC and QM are used in different ways by different people. I use the QC, quality control, to mean checking a product to find how many defects there are in it at the end of a process. Other people use quality assurance, QA, to mean that role. For me, quality assurance, QA, means checking that a process has been conformed with, but also, very importantly, checking that it was the right process to do. Quality management involves quality assurance and quality control, but it also involves planning for quality, preventing quality, root cause analysis, feedback loops. So we haven't got clarity really about what these words mean. So we have an opportunity, therefore, to slightly redefine them, to use them in different ways. So, I mentioned that different people have different views of quality. And here's some stakeholders on the next slide. We can see here some stakeholders with intersecting network of communication lines, complex communication going on across the project. And we have some customers there, and customers typically will have two views of quality. First of all, they'll have the user view of quality. Can I carry out my specific tasks? Quite a narrow view for each individual, but across a group of individuals you see a wider view. The second view of quality they will have is a value view of quality. They will be saying, can we afford it? Did it give me a return on investment? Was it good value for money? The analogy that I always use there is around clothing. I could go out and buy a Jean Muir suit, and it would cost me several £1,000s, but it would last me for decades. I'd be wearing it 30 or 40 years later, and it would still look elegant, and it would still look good, because the underlying engineering, the underlying tailoring is so excellent, and the design is so excellent. But you pay a price for that. And maybe I haven't got several £1,000s to spend on a suit. So perhaps I go to a shop like in the UK it will be Marks and Spencer's, reasonably good quality for a lower price, and I pay a couple of £100 for my suit and it lasts me a couple of years. Or maybe I'm going on holiday and I just want a t-shirt to wear on the beach. I will go to a cheap shop and I will pay a couple of pounds for a t-shirt, and I might just throw it away at the end of the holiday. Now, all three of those are quality solutions to a problem from the value quality point of view, and they require different levels of engineering, and they're for different customers in different circumstances. If, however, we look at the builders and the measurers, That is, people who are building products, people like developers and designers, and people like testers and auditors who are measuring quality. Very often they focus on a manufacturing view of quality. They're looking at whether a good process was carried out, they're looking at the number of defects that were found, they're looking at whether a specification was met. And that's very good and very measurable, but of course if the specification is wrong, we may not meet any of those user and value attributes that are so important. And then we have the managers, who will very much focus on a value view of quality. The supporters will see quality from the point of view of its attributes. How much work is it going to take for them? So the IT infrastructure people will be interested in performance, security, network traffic, reliability. So if we can see is different people have different views, and at the bottom there we have society, who may not have a direct vote in what's happening in the project, but who undoubtedly will be affected by it because of environmental or resource usage, or because of the way the software is designed, and so on and so forth. And in particular, when I think of my job at Dolphin, we think very much about society at large. Is that website accessible? Is a screen reader going to be able to read it? What happens when you jump to the next link? Is it clear you've gone to the next link? And there's a question there also, which I put up there. Some of you might be thinking, don't testers do more than measure? And it's true. We do all sorts of things. We might demonstrate that something works. We might look for defects in it. We might identify levels of risk. All sorts of different things. But the reason we do all of those is to be able to report information to all those other stakeholders. So we do more than measure, but the measurement and information is a key deliverable for us. When we look at the next slide, what I'm looking at there is I'm setting different types of testing, different testing activities against those different roles. And you can look there and you can see you've got requirements reviews, design reviews, which are types of static testing that can be done early on. We have task-based and technical testing. We have beta testing, which obviously are types of test execution. We have also operational acceptance testing, OAT, in that category. We have things like quality planning and metrics and post-implementation reviews. Now, look at that range of testing. We have a question now. Do we need a specialist role anymore? Is there, if everybody else can do the testing, do we need specialist testers at all? What's the role for a specialist? I'm challenging you there to think wider than just, I want to protect my job. What could you do to enable everybody else to do that testing and do it really well? What would happen then? Okay, so on the next slide, I'm saying maybe actually when you look at those different quality viewpoints, what we're doing as testers, and also people who are quality managers, who are auditors, who are in quality assurance, what we're actually doing is helping people to understand each other's quality viewpoints. A couple of slides ago, I mentioned the user and the value definition, and I mentioned the product definition. There's two others on there that I didn't particularly mention. The product view, I alluded to looking at things like performance and reliability. Those are product attributes. And the other one's transcendent. Now, this is really important. This is about hearts and minds. This is about whether you love to work with somebody, whether you are loyal to a particular brand. And this is about people and their interrelationships. Very interesting one. You can actually have some manufacturing defects in a product or problems with the service, and if, as a company, you deal with that well, you can find people actually are more positive in their assessment of the level of quality than they are with companies where there are no defects at all. It is quite strange. Now, I'm not suggesting there that we put defects in things deliberately so we can solve them and look good. What I'm saying is actually hearts and minds are really important in people's perceptions. And again, think about the value view of quality. If you go to a cheap budget hotel, it's standard, you will accept what it's like. You'll be quite happy with that level because that's what you've paid for. If you go to a 5-star hotel, you might find you're much more likely to be complaining about things because your expectations are different. So that's an intersection of all those quality viewpoints. Now I think as quality specialists, as testers, as measurers, part of what we're doing is understanding those viewpoints and explaining them to all the different groups. Okay, now, some of you, no doubt, are sitting there saying, it's all very well to say this, but we need specialist testers because it's a specialist role and other people don't do it well. So on the next slide, I'm going to give you a real example. This is a real company. I joined them in 1987. In 1988, I became the quality manager. So there are about 150 business analysts and developers working there, and when I joined in 1987, I was the only specialist tester. Clearly, I was not going to do the testing. So instead, what I did was I trained all the business analysts and developers in how to do testing and how to do reviews. And the key processes were reviews and document sign-off, a document release process, exit criteria at key stages during the projects, and better testing done by everybody. And the testing was done by everyone on everything. The board members, including the managing director, went through that training and did appropriate reviews and testing on their artefacts. The people in accounts went through that training, the admin people, the receptionists, everybody in the company. And the key people in this were actually sales and marketing. When sales and marketing saw this process, they saw the idea of value and quality. They saw the idea of reviewing reviewing business proposals, sales proposals before they went out, of consulting with other people around the stakeholder groups. Their proposals got better. Their win rate got better. They really bought into it. It was quite amazing. So everybody in the organisation was doing testing capably and well. And we started that on the worst project. And what happened, the people on the worst project were doing long hours, they were miserable, their customers were miserable, there were loads of defects and failures. And after 6 months, we turned them round. And they were moving up the league table of projects. Their revenue was going up, the customer complaints were going down, the working hours were going down, the motivation was going up. Those people moved on then to more prestigious projects. And across the company, that repeated itself over and over again. It was quite amazing. It actually, even though I'd gone there saying this will work, I was surprised by how well it's worked. And I've seen this happen in other places I've worked since then. So this is the message I take to you. If we get everybody doing the testing, it works better than us as specialists trying to do the testing ourselves, particularly if we get in that early stage testing. So next slide, just a little bit more on this. Document release, as I said, was the critical process. And actually, once we got confident in-house, we also, at the expense of this company, which was providing third-party software services, we trained the key customers. We brought them in, we put them through the same training courses so they could take part in reviews of their requirements and understand what was going to happen. We put in the entry and exit for all the activities. The project manager role, notice this, the project manager role was to ensure quality. All the processes were on one-page diagrams using a method called entry, task, validation, exit, which basically says, how do I know I'm ready to start this activity? How do I know when I'm finished? How will I check it? Then I can pretty much do the task how I want to, providing those 3 areas are covered. And it was agile style. This is back 87, 88, 89. We realized one of the key things to do on the big delivery projects, particularly for maintenance, was to break it down into chunks of work that were being done month by month. So each month we did a mini project. We said, what are we going to do this month? We delivered that, it was acceptance tested, and then we decided what to do the next month. And it worked. It really, really worked. Everything got better. It enabled us to introduce root cause analysis. That meant at the end of each month we were also able to say what went wrong with the estimation, with the description of what we wanted, with the processes themselves. Could we make the reviews slicker? Could we do the testing better? And actually implement that straight away. And one of the ways we did this was, and some of you are going to cringe at this, but we went for ISO 9000 because what we realized was ISO 9000 tells you a minimum list of things to do, but it doesn't confine you to that. So whereas the auditing for ISO 9000 is very often, did you conform to that process? Tick. And move on. Actually, what we were able to do is say the auditors are going to be champions and mentors from areas of company who have knowledge, and what they're going to do is audit each other's projects and spread knowledge. So the auditor didn't just tick, 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 you've conformed or not conformed to processes. They were actually saying, do you know, we do it this way in our project. Have you thought of trying it that way? This is how we put our architecture together. We've tried using this sort of technique. Have you tried this tool? And vice versa. An auditor would come in and say, wow, you're doing that. I'm going to take that back and try that on my project. And this is actually really powerful because it means you're using the quality assurance process to move good practice around the company, and you're using the quality control process, the test execution to find defects, to do root cause analysis and again pass that information around the company. This is what the focus is, and it's critical getting everybody involved. And the project managers were really ready to embrace having responsibility for quality because with that they had flexibility. The first thing they had to do at the beginning of each project was assess the risk, and as a result decide which of a menu of process types were they going to adopt and how they were going to adopt it. And what they got audited against was their project quality management system, which will be a few pages describing what they had selected from the overall menu. They really liked that because it meant they could come in and work appropriately for a particular project and decide what activities were going to work and which ways to do them. So if it was appropriate to do full inspections that took hours and hours and hours, they could do that. And if it was appropriate to have 15-minute stand-up discussions in front of a whiteboard, they could do that. Both of those conformed to the review process. It's the mindset, it's not the paperwork. Now, I want to move on the next slide to thinking about us as testers as and what we normally do. And as testers, we talk a lot about providing dashboards, and I do it myself. I'm using these sorts of dashboards as we speak, implementing them as we speak. They're really useful for understanding the progress through the testing. Really useful to know how much testing we've done, how many defects we've found, how many of the requirements have passed, and so on and so forth. And particularly with the traffic light colour coding. But there is a big but on this, and there's a little quote on the top there. I don't know if you know the heebie-jeebies, but they're worth looking up. And that their hit song is called Meaningless Songs in High-Pitched Voices. No relation to any other pop group of a similar name, of course. But the point here is the questions we're answering with a dashboard like this one are not the questions that the project manager or the customer is asking. They don't tell you very directly, you can infer it, but they don't tell you directly how long is it going to take, how much longer, how confident are you about whether you're going to find more defects. Those are shining out to us as testers and test managers because we can infer things from those graphs, but they're not obvious to other people. So what we need to consider is what do people think of in the big picture. And the big picture is to do with money and time and customer satisfaction. Now, I haven't got time on the webinar to actually step you through in detail the calculations you can do for this, but if you look in the paper that accompanies the talk, what you will see is I've taken some figures from Capers-Jones' book, which are based on typical projects over the last 30 years, and I've taken some example figures from a project, and I've shown how you can use those together to start making predictions about money. Capers-Jones' book, what's so wonderful about it is that there are tables of data in there where you can look at what's been happening over the last decades, and you can say, right, I can see from this table that if I'm going to write 100,000 lines of C code, or rather the developers are going to do this, this is the likely number of defects going to be in there with this level of certainty. And if I carry out the following activities, testing, for example, this is how many defects I'm going to find, and this is how much it's going to cost me to do those activities. So it's a model, so it's going to have flaws in it. It's not going to match your situation exactly, but you can use it as a first base to do some calculations. So if I move to the next slide, you'll see on there the big picture financial message. You can go through those calculations. This is taken from the example that I've got in the paper. If you start early and you do requirements reviews and design reviews, you can spend 1.5 months and $48,000 for a total cost of $69,000, including fixing the post-live defects with about 40 to 80 defects. On the other hand, if you call us in as testers or you don't start reviewing until the end of the project, we're about to start system test, where are the testers? We're going to find a load more defects in testing. The testing from the point of view of number of defects found is going to look a whole load more effective, but it's going to cost us more, and it's going to cost us a whole load more in post-release support costs, because the number of defects we won't find in that testing is so much larger. And the reason for that is many of those defects you can't find easily in testing, particularly if you're testing against specifications. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do, it's a good thing to do, it's just that the specification can be wrong, and if you're not thinking about that, if you're not thinking about what else might need to happen, is the specification really right, you're not going to see some problems that are actually requirements and design problems. You're just not going to notice them. Key point there, of course, is that it might not be the test group who've done those reviews, but have the reviewers done the reviews with a testing mindset, or have they simply read through the documents uncritically? Now, the key point here, what worked at K3, was teaching everybody how to do the reviews properly, so they were all testing when they did the reviews, not simply reading the document. The next couple of slides are quite busy, but I just wanted to indicate how we can actually get from test metrics up to indicators, and smoking is the example on this one. So if we have an individual smoking who has cancer, that's a single observation. When we look at a whole group, that gives us a metric. We can work out a percentage of people who smoke within a target group who've got cancer, and then we can accumulate that and start making inferences across society, and that gives us a predictive indicator of what's going to happen if smoking increases. Now, it's an indicator. That's not an absolute. So Bill, who's never smoked, we're not saying he's never going to get cancer. He might get unlucky. And Annie, who has smoked, she might get lucky. She might not get cancer. What we're saying is there is a predictive indicator. Now, if we look at the same thing on the next slide to do with testing, if we find 56 critical defects, that's a measure. If we calculate based on Capers-Jones tables, for example, or our previous experience, how many defects we're likely to have found in that testing, maybe that means based on our usual experience, probably 95% of them, that's a metric, we can now calculate what the remaining defects will cost in life. Again, we can use Capers-Jones figures, or we can use our own experience, or we can use a mix of the two. And that will give us a predictive indicator of the cost of not releasing. I'll give you an example from my own experience as a test manager post K3. I did some predictive indicators on a project, and I worked out that if we had another month testing post the planned deadline, we could get rid of a lot of these defects. And these defects were going to cost us a large amount of money. Now, I went with those calculations to the program manager, and he looked at me and he said, every month we're late, the FSA is going to fine us. It was actually 4 times the amount. So what he had found out from that is that going live was the best thing to do, but he knew how much he was going to have to budget for support costs, additional support costs. I'd done the right job, not by asking for additional time for testing, but by providing that information. And I didn't realise that's what I was doing. I thought I was providing an argument to get more testing time. And I realised after the conversation the information was really important for the decision making. Not necessarily that I was going to get more testing time. It was about making the right decision for the business. The big picture was about saving having the fine. It wasn't about having to do extra support costs. Now, this slide here, the next one, is a total cost of quality graph. What this is talking about is comparing several organisations. So the organisations on the left-hand side are not doing any quality practices, and they're having a high cost of failure. As you move down to the middle of the graph, what's happening is people are increasing the amount that they're doing on reviews and testing. We reach an optional point in the middle with lowest costs. Now what we're saying there is there's still some failures, but the organisation is getting the best cost benefit at that point. And then off at the right-hand side of the graph, we're spending more and more on reviews and testing, and fewer defects are going into live. And you need to look at that graph and think, where does my organisation need to be? Because different organisations and different projects, it will be appropriate to be in different places on that graph. There will be times when an organisation just wants to be first to market, and they will bear with defects and failures because the big thing is about first to market, and they'll take those support costs. There will be organisations who want to minimise their costs, and they'll take a certain number of failures. And there will be organisations where it's critical that the software is as close to perfection as we can get it, and there's a sliding scale on that because we're never going to reach perfection, and they'll be prepared to pay the price for that. You need to know which game your organisation is in and which game they're in for particular projects and particular products. It will be different at different times. That's a good question to ask about the amount of testing that you're going to do, because if the project is about saving costs, you don't want to be spending more money on the testing than you're going to save on the costs, save on the project overall. You don't want to be pushing that over to the right-hand side when that's not where the organisation wants it. So again, this is about seeing the big picture. And you know, the best cost savings, the most effective cost savings are about doing reviews of requirements and design, about understanding what we want to do before we start building the code. And that can be in terms of an agile project, so it's looking at user stories and making sure we understand them at the beginning of a sprint, or it could be in a waterfall project. Of course, we know in a waterfall project 2 years later things will have changed anyway. We understand that. But the point is, the earlier you get the quality built in, the cheaper it is. We know that. Therefore, our focus should be on persuading other people, training other people, mentoring and coaching them to do appropriate testing in order to reduce costs. So, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a professional or craftsperson? Do you want to be a specialist or a generalist? On the next slide, I've shown 4 possible roles. I'm suggesting that all IT professionals, as generalists, should have craft-level skills at testing and at quality assurance. Every single IT professional needs that. And indeed, if you look at the professional development for something like the British Computer Society, that's one of the things they talk about, that all IT professionals have a knowledge of all the parts of the IT profession. So testers understand about hardware, and hardware engineers understand about testing. You might want to be a customer advocate. That's a generalist craft role. You would be looking at you'd have business domain knowledge, you would have skills in QA and QC, you would be mentoring and advising and teaching, and within projects and teams, you'd be actually carrying out testing, monitoring and controlling it. You might want to be a craft specialist, a quality facilitator, perhaps a performance specialist, a usability specialist, a security specialist. That would be another role. Or you might want to be an excellence advocate, and this is a professional specialist role, and I'm suggesting that as testers we could tend towards that role. We're actually at a high management level within organisations. We're providing information that enables them to make decisions and which makes the whole organisation excellent. That it's no longer about testing products, it's about the delivery of what the organisation as a whole does. And this is very much a high-level role. I think that's a very interesting aspiration to actually think about which route map you would want to take through that. Some of you may want to be specialist or generalist craftspersons and get better and better at your craft, and that's an excellent thing to do. But there may be others of you who think, no, actually what I want to do is be an excellence advocate. I want a broad and also deep knowledge, and I want to actually help my organisation as a whole, wider even than the IT department. Think about that as an aspiration. Think about that preventative role. So, what do we need to do? We need to think about how our measurement and information will help improve not just testing, but also development, maintenance, and the modelling and activities of the organisation as a whole. That virtuous circle on this next slide showing that good software engineering leads to good models, leads to an upturn, we hope, and leads to an investment. So, my main points there. Focusing on improving the service to the customer and not on improving testing. Focusing on enabling others to improve. That will reduce our involvement, but will actually make us have a more interesting role, I think, in the long term. And focusing our passion on the big picture, thinking about the organisation as a whole, rather than thinking about the detail of the test results, actually making those test results into indicators that show the organisation what it needs to achieve and how it's going to achieve its goals. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been useful, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Isabel, for what was a very insightful presentation. I put one of the polls up there just while you were speaking at the end. Which of the following do you view yourself as, kind of according to the graph you had up? And professional, craftsperson, generalist, and specialist were the options. And the most popular was specialist, with 12 people opting for that option at 48%. The next being professional at 36%. And then a couple of people, there's 4% at craftsperson and 12% at generalist. And while I'm letting people think about questions to ask, I'll remind you how to do it. If you just hit the Q&A tab at the top of your window and just type in your question, we'll be happy to answer it. And in the meanwhile, I'll just put up this quick poll as well I think we spoke about earlier. Isabel, is it your aspiration to be a customer advocate, quality specialist, an excellence advocate, or an IT generalist? So if you could take a moment to fill that in, it'd be great. And we have one question here, Isabel, from Blindu. It's, what happens when the testing is imposed by non-testers in an organisation, not necessarily directly?
So the question there was, what happens if the testing is imposed? Now, I wonder, does that mean, do you mean the test estimates? Do you mean the way that testing is done, the methods that are used? I think if you're in the position at all of feeling that you're having things imposed on you, one of the first things to think about is, why is that happening? Is it perhaps that as a group you're not communicating what you can actually do? It might be that what you need to do is think about communicating with those people who are your stakeholders who are imposing, as you put it. What is it they're trying to get from you? Why are they doing this? Is it that they don't trust your estimates because they've perhaps not been good estimates in the past? Is it that your testing in the past has either been too shallow and therefore what they've seen is failures in life? Is it that it's actually been, and I've seen this happen, is it that in the past you've tried to do too much testing and consequently things don't get released, and therefore the return on investment in the project is not good? Think about that total cost to quality graph. Are you trying to push it too far off to the right-hand side into the green area, and actually the organisation wants to be at the low-cost bottom point? If the other thing that can happen is that the testing may be not very well focused. And people might be aware of that. So, for example, is it clear to your stakeholders that what you're testing are items that are of importance to them? Have you made it clear that you understand their requirements, their user stories? When you have conversations with your project managers and your development managers, do you talk to them in their language? Do you make it clear that you understand what they're doing? That sort of thing, I think, is what helps it. If you start communicating with people, then you'll understand why it is that they're doing what they're doing, and you'll be able to understand what it is they need from you. I think sometimes when we have independent test teams, that independence turns into isolation. And if people stop seeing clearly what we're doing, if we're not visible and we're not speaking in their language, then they stop believing in what we're doing, and that's when they start imposing from the outside. We in fact should be going out as ambassadors and showing them what we can do, but actually more important, helping them to do it for themselves.
Yeah, well, that's great as well. We have another question here from Tracy. And I think this is one that quite a lot of people are probably wondering after listening to the presentation is, do you have any suggestions on how to get higher level management buy-in to teach others or to sharing the knowledge, as this obviously has a resource impact on testing? Yeah, it makes it tough. I think whenever you do any sort of improvement project, you go through a stage when things feel worse rather than better. Whenever anybody, any organisation, any person tries to do things in a different way, what happens is you have to take everybody over a learning curve, and you've got old situation in parallel with new situation. So it is very difficult. One of the things is I think you need an advocate, a champion for this, who is going to be prepared to talk directly to the board. When I joined K3 Group, it was in a very junior role. As the only tester, I was in one of the teams reporting into somebody who was reporting into somebody who was reporting into somebody. And up a dotted line somewhere was the managing director. And I managed to get myself into a conversation with my manager's manager, if you see what I mean, and say, I think we could do these things to make it better. And he listened to me for a short bit, because that's all you get. That's really important as well. Quick message, I can save you money if you let me do this. I can save us time if you let me do this. He said, try that out a little bit. So I tried it out a bit, and then he said to me, write a report to the managing director. So I think one of the things you've got to do is be bold. Go and find the finance director and tell them you can save them some money. Now, get people in the corridor. You'll have 30 seconds to make your case. So pick up a nice fact about something like total cost of quality or saving time, if you look at the Capers-Jones examples. The one slide I had there which was saying, well, we could do it at this point and it's going to cost you this much, or we can do it at that point. That's why that message is so important. There's pages and pages of calculation behind that which nobody would want to read. The message is those two sentences. Which way do you want me to do it? Early or late? So I think that's the thing to do. Find the right ear. Don't be scared of people. Excellent. Thanks, Isabel. I'd say some people will be going up and approaching their finance directors after today's webinar. The next question we have here is from Joanne. She's a starter to a company and she's been brought in to manage testing. So she's wondering, how would you approach project managers and development managers to introduce the concept of testing reviews into their teams when they do not understand the benefits of testing early in the project? Again, you have to take
the time and money examples to them. And it might be that you can do an analysis of some of the defects that have been particularly painful for them to fix, which will be the requirements and design ones, and say, and start a conversation which is, could we have found these earlier? And it's really important at this point that you don't start trying to impose on them that you want them to do reviews. You almost have to coax them into suggesting it themselves. I think that's quite important. But if you haven't immediately got a buy-in from the top of the organisation that this is what you're going to be doing, so start having the conversations with the project managers about how time and money could have been saved had we found these defects earlier, and here's the way we could have done that. Let's do that for the next project. And with the development managers and the developers, the conversation is about not having to do that tedious rework. Fewer defects being found in the run-up to release, less overnight emergency fixes, and that sort of thing. So look at it from their point of view. What's the win for them? How's their life going to get better?
Excellent. Thanks, Isabel. That's some great advice for Joanne. The next question we have here is from Katya, and she asks, if the project processes are already full of quality, what else can you do to improve them even further?
Well, you may not need to. You may be on the right place in the total cost of quality graph. So that's one thing to think of. If what you're doing is sufficient for your organisation, you don't need to keep improving it in terms of doing better and better processes and better engineering. The next thing to look at is, can you make them more efficient without losing effectiveness? So are there ways you can speed up the processes? Are there ways you can speed up the quality activities? Are there places, is it now the time to bring in some automation, for example? Can you actually start, if you've got some things which are feeling like they're really embedded into projects, can you actually start bringing in some of the more agile processes? Can you actually start reducing what you're expecting people to do because it's so imbued in the environment of the organisation that the engineering mindset is going to hold, if you like? That type of thing. So ideally you would take those hand in hand through improvements. You would want things to be getting better and also more efficient, so more effective and more efficient. But if you've got enough of the effectiveness, either you're in the right place, just keep going, or look at efficiency savings. And keep looking at what's still coming through in the way of defects and failures and going back to the root cause analysis on those. Look for those for your changes. But you don't do improvement for the sake of it.
Oh, that makes sense. Thanks for that, Isabel. And before I ask the next question, I'll throw one here. Em McBride has just wanted to say, excellent presentation and good to see one so focused on testing and quality improvement. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Ian. Thank you.
One here now from Margaret is, what advice do you give for getting developers to alter their CodeWorks mindset and getting them to think of how to break the system? Interesting one.
I've just been working in the last few weeks with one of the developers at Dolphin on one of his detailed specifications, and he gave it to me for review, and in the course of reviewing it, what I actually did was append types of tests that I would want him to do at unit test. And then we got into a discussion about the type of testing he was already doing, which was very white box really. He was checking the code routes through, making sure he hadn't gone round loops the wrong number of times, both ways down all the branches and all that sort of stuff. And I said to him, well, from a testing point of view, you've also got to almost pretend you don't know what's in the code and look at it at right angles. And that's why I've got some of the tests in that I've got. And he suddenly clicked onto that. And I overheard him the other day telling other people about this. So I think working with them by reviewing their specifications, by working with them perhaps even to review and discuss the code, by helping them to write the unit tests the first time round. It's also quite useful if you can offer yourself as a service. For example, example, if there's automation going on, maybe that's a good way to get involved. You could say, look, actually we could automate some of these tests if you wrote them in a particular way. I'll help you do that, and then we can get the automation tools in. So again, it's finding a message that is right for them. The other key thing with this particular developer was he was also talking then to one of the people who defined the requirements for the product, and what really interested him as the result of this process, and it was one of the first more formal reviews that we'd done at Dolphin, was that the chap from the customer-facing side came up with a completely different set of comments. And he liked that because he suddenly realised that having this review, he wasn't just having everybody coming up with punctuation problems or things that weren't that important. I suggested to him a focus for a couple of different review roles, and he got different sorts of comments back, and suddenly that told him a whole lot of stuff that he needed to know about what the thing had to do and how he could test it. But also then, when he went back to the code, having gone through that exercise, he came back to me and said, I've now realised a whole lot of other things that I haven't specified. So I think it's at that sort of route, really.
Okay, thanks for that, Isabel. Last question that we have here today is from Alan Riley, and he, I think correctly, says he has a feeling that you were a major advocate of early or static testing, and this is something I discuss with clients all the time. Would you recommend any material to help with providing evidence as to the benefits of early testing, such as quality, costs, etc.?
Yes, the Capers-Jones, I get the Capers-Jones book because there's just tables and tables there for all the different programming, well not for all, but for many different programming languages, worked examples, data taken from right across the industry. There's also specific examples in Gilbert and Graham's book, and there's specific examples in my own book as well, but because my book looks right across the life cycle, not specifically at reviews, your rich source is going to be Capers-Jones and Gilbert and Graham software inspection. There's also lots of papers out on the internet where people are quoting different things. Watch out for the 10 times more expensive figures because people are questioning those. So there was figures out a few years ago on waterfall projects talking about 6 to 10 times more expensive at each stage of the life cycle. It looks like that with iterative projects that goes down to maybe 2 to 4 times, and it looks like with agile projects it goes down again to 1 to 2 times. So obviously the faster we're feeding back, the cheaper it is because we haven't done so much. So there's some sources there. The SEI, Software Engineering Institute, have got figures and various other sources. Check if you look on the internet that it's a trustworthy source for obvious reasons, that you can actually, people aren't just quoting each other back and forth, as it were. The other thing I would say is analogy is really useful in this. And again, one of the developers at Dolphin did a beautiful one the other day where he said to somebody, if I was making chairs and I just turned the legs and made the holes in the seat for 4 legs, and you came up to me and said, I think we need a 5th leg, don't you think that would have been a discussion we should have had earlier? And he was making a point there, which I thought he expressed beautifully, that because software isn't visible, people think it's easy to change it. But if you make an analogy in terms of something very concrete in the way of either craft or engineering, people can see how expensive it is to change your mind. And that's why if you're doing manufacturing, for example, you need to prototype before you actually start building the final thing. So I think those sorts of, don't forget about prototyping as a way of reviewing, for example. That will also work very well. And also I would have a look at David Heyman's talk at EuroSTAR last year, from David Heyman from New Zealand. He gave a very interesting talk about doing dress rehearsals, pre-code build on a voice recognition service system where they had somebody being the computer and other people phoning in and then checking what the responses sounded like. So you can be quite imaginative about some of this. You'll see evidence there about review processes of all sorts of different types working. So you know, look out for that sort of thing, the war stories you see in the conferences.
Great, Isabel. I think that's all of the questions for now. Yeah, it's been a great presentation, so I'd like to thank you and to thank everyone that attended today as well. We had a great attendance. And also to remind everybody that this webinar was recorded and should be up in the EuroSTAR webinar archive early next week, and that anyone that registered for this webinar will receive a mail to let them know that it's up there. And also that later on today we'll probably be sending you a little surprise compliment to this webinar as well. And just before I let Isabel go, I just want to point out that at the moment the call for papers for EuroSTAR is open. So if attending this presentation has inspired any of you guys to get involved, if you have a story to speak at EuroSTAR, you probably see the EuroSTAR site now on your screen, go and take a look at the call for submissions. So if you go from the home page and just follow my arrow, have a look at the call for submissions here. Jeff Thompson there is our program chair for this year, and the conference team is in pursuit of quality. And if you download the call for submissions PDF, it goes through in great detail what the program team are looking for this year. So if you want to take a look at that, that would be absolutely fantastic. We really enjoy getting submissions through from everybody. And I suppose last of all, I'd like to thank Isabel for what was a fantastic presentation. And again, thank you all for attending. Thanks a lot, Isabel.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. Now, I'd just like to remind everyone that this webinar is now over, so if you could hang up the telephone and just log off the software, that would be fantastic. And we hope to see you with a future EuroSTAR webinar. Goodbye.